Hello everyone, welcome to Chetan Bharat Learning and welcome back to our series of UPSC Mains 2021 course and test series. This course and test series is designed for those of you who cleared their prelims examination this year. Congratulations to you all and are appearing for mains examination. Now, those of you who weren't able to clear their prelims examination, well, if you're appearing or preparing for UPSC examination next year, well, this course is relevant for you guys as well. All right. Now, if you have been following our lectures for this while, if you are following the lectures with respect to this course, and if you are enrolled in this course, well, we have shared this timetable with you all. All right. So if you're enrolled in this course, you know by now, that we have covered 9 lectures with respect to economy. And you know this by now that I take the economics portion of your mains examination. Now, through these 9 lectures, we have covered 45 issues with respect to economics. Now, that's a big number as far as economics is concerned. And you know this also that we discuss these issues through questions. We discuss questions. So in a question answer format, we discuss various issues that are pertinent for your mains examination. All right. Now, we are done with 9 lectures and through these 9 lectures, we have covered almost 90% of your syllabus for economics for your mains examination. Today is the turn of lecture number 10. And in this lecture, we will cover this part of your syllabus: infrastructure, energy, ports, roads, airports, railways, etc. So infrastructure the topic of infrastructure is very important for your mains as well as prelims examination. But today we are concerned with mains examination. So we will discuss this topic through a set of 5 questions through which we'll try to cover important issues which are relevant with respect to infrastructure sector. All right, makes sense? So without further delay, without further ado, let's begin with the first question. And you must be familiar with this question, I'm sure, because if you are preparing for UPSC sincerely, and well, you have cleared your prelims, so you were preparing for UPSC sincerely, you must have read about this. Right? It's a very hot topic. So chances are that they might ask questions related to national infrastructure pipeline in your mains examination. So let's cover this topic also. Now, question number 1 is, what is national infrastructure pipeline? Discuss the benefits that will accrue due to this project. Now, this question is a very short question. Short, by short, I mean that if this question appears in your mains examination as it is, it would be a 150-word question, or as we call it, 10-marker question, right? Now, it's a simple question. The language is not that complicated, and it's not very difficult to interpret what the examiner is trying to ask, all right? They have directly asked you, what is national infrastructure pipeline, and what are the benefits of national infrastructure pipeline? So let's discuss what national infrastructure pipeline is. Well, national infrastructure pipeline is a project which will cost the India 102 lakh crore. It is a pipeline of various infrastructure projects. It is a pipeline of various infrastructure projects, and those infrastructure projects would cover social infrastructure and economic infrastructure as well. Plus, they say that 70% of the projects in this national infrastructure pipeline would belong to these areas: energy, road, railways, urban. So 70% of your projects would be from these areas, and these areas are absolutely crucial if you want to enhance the productivity of the infrastructure assets that you have. Now, why is there a need for a national infrastructure pipeline? Well, as you guys all know, that India aims to become a $5 trillion economy by 2025. We want to become a $5 trillion economy. Currently, we are $2.9 or $3 trillion. Our GDP is that. We want to become a $5 trillion economy by this year. Now, for that to happen, you need to invest around $1.6 trillion in infrastructure. So if you aspire to become a $5 trillion economy, you need to spend at least this much amount into infrastructure sector, right? Now, currently, this doesn't mean, or currently, I'm not saying this that government of India or state governments are not investing in infrastructure projects. We are currently investing in infrastructure projects, but currently our regime of infrastructure investment has certain issues. Some of these issues are project delays, right? Bankruptcy, cost overruns, regulatory problems, regulatory burden, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason why these issues, these problems crop up is that our infrastructure projects are not properly planned. Therefore, government thought that we need to come up with a 5-year plan of sorts. Now, don't use the word 5-year plan, but government is actually planning with a long-term horizon. Government is planning to implement certain infrastructure projects in these 5 years. The National Infrastructure Pipeline is actually a pipeline of infrastructure projects till 2025. So we are planning long-term, or at least you can call it medium-term, and this planned approach towards implementation of infrastructure projects would actually give us a lot of benefits, right? Now, let's talk in brief about National Infrastructure Pipeline. So it's a 102 lakh crore project. 102 lakh crore project. 70% of the projects would be in energy, road, rail, urban. But we will also focus on social infrastructure. Why social infrastructure? What do we mean by social infrastructure, by the way? Schools, hospitals, like that, right? So social infrastructure is also important, not just economic infrastructure. So these things are part of economic infrastructure, but social infrastructure is also important because it has a bearing on the quality of life of our citizens, right? So social infrastructure is also there. So all these things in a planned fashion would be implemented under National Infrastructure Pipeline. Now, as I've told you before, that National Infrastructure Pipeline during this course of 5 years would cost around 102 lakh crore. Now that's a lot of money. That's a bit too much for central government to finance. That is why central government is saying that this entire cost would not be borne by us alone. 102 lakh crores would be contributed by central government, state government would contribute, and private players also, because after all, we want private players to invest in infrastructure, right? A dominant chunk of this corpus or dominant chunk of investment would come from private players. Why central and state governments are investing? When central and state governments are investing, because they want to crowd in private investment. Private players won't invest on their own. Private players need some assurance that whether this infrastructure project would work or not, because they are in there for profit. Government might be there in for development and all the other reasons, but private players are there in this business of infrastructure for profit. So to assure private players that you will earn money out of these infrastructure projects, government is also putting in some of its own money, right? So central government would invest some amount, state government would invest some amount, and dominant chunk would come from private players. All right. So this 102 lakh crore over a 5-year horizon would come from these three players. Most of the projects would be in this, would be from these 4 sectors, and focus would be on social infrastructure as well. All right. So that's a brief introduction of what National Infrastructure Pipeline is, and that is what is being asked in this question. What is National Infrastructure Pipeline? So first part of your question is answered. You will take good 60 to 70 words to explain what National Infrastructure Pipeline is. Now, discuss the benefits that will accrue due to this project. Now, what are the benefits of National Infrastructure Pipeline? First, number 1, good quality infrastructure. Good quality infrastructure increases output of your economy. And by output, I mean GDP. After all, you want your GDP to reach $5 trillion levels. right? So investment in infrastructure would enhance your GDP. Clear? The other aspect is investment in infrastructure and implementation of infrastructure projects would actually enhance employment as well. Employment generation would happen. Then aggregate demand levels. Currently our economy is still recovering from COVID-19 pandemic, and what better way to recover than investment in infrastructure? They say that road to recovery always goes through the path of infrastructure projects, right? So all the major developed countries are doing this, are following this approach. There is this $1.6 trillion bill that US Senate is about to pass. American Senate. America is also choosing the path of infrastructure expenditure to recover, right? For economic recovery. Clear? So why we spend on infrastructure? Because it generates output, generates employment, generates demand levels, right? And the other thing is efficiency in your economy. Or as they say, productivity. Good quality roads, good quality bridges, good quality railways, good quality electricity grids would enhance the efficiency of your economy. If your roads are not of good quality, then transport services suffer. They are not efficient. If your storage houses are not of good quality, well then storage services suffer, right? If electricity is not of good quality, well then factories suffer. Everyone suffers, right? So investment in infrastructure projects would enhance efficiency, productivity of your economy. Make sense? And so on and so forth. Plus, because National Infrastructure Pipeline envisions private sector participation, and private sector participation is synonymous with better management of infrastructure assets, right? So when we are involving private sector investors, we are actually ensuring better management of these projects, right? So well-planned projects, private sector participation would lead to better implementation of infrastructure projects, and that is what is being envisioned through this. All right. Baki, how you should answer the what should be the structure of your answer? How should you structure these points? Whatever we have discussed, all this knowledge, how should you structure that in your answer? Well, you shall see that in your model answer. So don't worry about that. All you need to know is what are the points that you need to mention in this? All right? Okay then. Let's move on to question number 2. Question number 2 deals with National Monetization Plan. National Monetization Plan is game changer for infrastructure development in India. Discuss. Also mention the possible constraints before its successful implementation. Well, first of all, you need to mention what? In the introduction part of your answer, what is National Monetization Plan? Well, there are various government assets that are lying idle. So there is ample government land, there are ample government created airstrips. There are various government infrastructure projects that were implemented, but they are lying idle. They are not being used. Such projects are known as brownfield infrastructure projects. Brownfield infrastructure, brownfield investment. What do you mean by brownfield investment? Well, brownfield investment is that investment which deals with revamping or repairing existing assets. So there are two terms that you need to be familiar with. Greenfield projects. Greenfield projects deal with creating infrastructure assets from scratch, right from the scratch. You are building infrastructure projects. Brownfield investment is related to already built infrastructure projects. You are just repairing them, reusing them, right? So there are various government assets that are lying idle. What government is planning to do is government is trying to monetize these assets. So let's suppose there is this airport that the government had built. There is this airport, right? And this airport was lying idle. Government didn't have time, money, energy to operate this airport. Now what government is trying to do is, government is trying to lease out this airport to private players. Now, private players would operate this airport because government has given that to given this piece of asset on lease to a private player. Now, private player will operate this asset, and this asset won't be idle. So this asset will be used. Plus, government will also receive some money in return for this lease. Right? Hence, it is known as monetization of idle assets. Monetization of idle assets. Clear? So, National Monetization Plan, long story cut short, is nothing but idle government assets being monetized. Idle government assets being reused, and government is receiving some money in return, because those assets would be reused by private players. Now, what are the advantages of such a move? Well, they say that central government would earn around, let's talk about advantages. Advantage number 1, fiscal advantage. They say that government would earn around 6,000 crore rupees by monetizing these assets. Right? So, fiscal advantage, government can use this money, government will receive this money, and government can use this money to invest in other infra/developmental assets. So those assets that were lying idle, government's capital was locked in those assets. Government had invested so much, but they are not giving any returns to the government. Now government shall receive some return, and government will use that return to further invest in infrastructure projects. Government might use these 6,000 crore rupees to invest in national infrastructure pipeline. Make sense? So it's kind of reuse of capital. Relocation of capital. Capital that was lying idle will be reused to create other infrastructure assets. This would create further jobs, further demand, further output. Right? So investment. Then enhancing private investment by leasing out or giving these brownfield assets to some private players. What the government is trying to do is, government is actually inviting private money. Government is actually inviting private investment. In a way, government is crowding in private investment, right? So enhancing private investment, which is very important for infrastructure development, right? We have talked about this. Then, as you guys all know, private management is synonymous with better management. So these idle assets would be efficiently utilized. So we'll have some gains with respect to efficiency, right? And it would further encourage private investors, or it would give further avenues. It would generate more avenues for private investment. Plus, these peripheral advantages like demand creation or output gain, resource efficiency, all these things are already included. I mean, we have talked about it. I'm not writing it on the board, but you will get that in your model answers. So there are various advantages. The more important ones are written on the board, but there are certain other peripheral advantages that you'll get in your model answers. All right. So this second question is also a bit simple. Clear? It is just asking you about what National Monetization Plan is and what are its benefits, because they are saying that it might be a game changer. So it will be a game changer in this regard. All right. And now we'll come to the second part. Mention the possible constraints before its successful implementation. Now, what can be the possible constraints? They are very simple. One, implementation. If this national monetization plan is not implemented properly, well, government will not gain these 6,000 crore rupees. These 6,000 crore rupees are the potential gains that government can get by monetizing these assets. But if this plan is not implemented properly, government might not get 6,000 crore rupees. All right. So implementation part is very important. Then these private players who are going to run these infrastructure idle facilities, well, they do face regulatory burden. Regulatory burden. right? And this regulatory burden might discourage them from taking over these infrastructure assets. So government might not excite these private players to take over these idle infrastructure assets. So this can be a possible constraint. Then some of these projects, some of these brownfield assets might not be financially viable for private players. So they might lose interest in taking over these assets. So these are some of the possible constraints, right? So government needs to come up with certain incentives. For example, government may use viability gap funding to invite private players, to incentivize private players to operate these projects. Government might reduce regulatory burden, right? Government might actually give certain fiscal incentives to private players so that they invest or they take over these idle assets, right? These things that government should do, because these are some of the possible constraints, and these are important possible constraints. All right. So yeah, the possible constraints are as following. There are certain other possible constraints as well, but you'll find them in your model answers. All right. Let's move on to question number 3. Private sector participation is the need of the hour for Indian Railways. Discuss in the light of recent initiatives taken by the government in that regard. Now, this particular question might sound a bit easy, but the challenging part of answering this question is the structure that you need to follow. Right? What should be the structure of your answer for this particular question? Let's read this question carefully. Private sector participation is the need of the hour for Indian Railways. Discuss in the light of recent initiatives taken by the government in that regard. Now, how will you answer this? Let me give you a flow chart of how to proceed with this answer. Initially, you'll write about the issues. First of all, you'll write introduction, and introduction can be I mean, you don't need to write a very long introduction. You can just write 2 or 3 lines. You can write Indian Railways is very important for Indian economy. It's used for transportation. It's used for passenger traffic and all that stuff. So investment in Indian Railways has a multiplier effect. Right? Has a sort of multiplier effect. By multiplier effect, I mean that the amount you invest actually gives you more than that you have invested. All right. Now, introduction can be that. It can be a very short introduction. We are not concerned with that. Initially, then you'll write about the issues plaguing the railways. Then you'll write, so this will be 1. What are the problems that Indian Railways are facing? Then you'll write about how private sector can solve some of these problems. All right. And then you'll write about what can be the possible pitfalls of private sector participation. Which means challenges or cons of private sector participation, right? So in this part, you'll write about pros of private sector participation. In this part, you'll write about challenges of private sector participation. And in the end, you'll write some of the initiatives taken by the government. Recently, some of the initiatives are being taken by the government to enhance private sector participation in Indian Railways. All right. That is basic trivia. You can write about that. But I need you to focus on this flow chart. That's how you'll proceed. So in the issues part, you'll write the issues that are plaguing Indian Railways. For example, Indian Railways is pretty loss-making. Right? Then Indian Railways has a high operating ratio, 98%, 97%, which leaves very less money in the hands of Indian Railways to make further investments, right? Operating ratio is very high. Then, because Indian Railways is in the hands of the government, government is not managing it in a way that it turns out to be profitable. So what is happening is cross-subsidization. Cross-subsidization of passenger trains by freight trains. So what is happening is, because government doesn't want, because government is actually also concerned about the votes of the people. So government won't raise passenger tariff, passenger ticket price, right? Clear? Government already subsidizes heavily this passenger price, tariff. We should use the word tariff, right? So where is the government or Indian Railways getting money for subsidizing this ticket size, this ticket price? Well, they have kept freight tickets, freight that transports goods. Freight is very expensive. Tariffs are pretty high. Freight tariffs are pretty high, right? So in a way, freight tariffs are cross-subsidizing, or freight tariffs are subsidizing passenger tariffs. Now that makes Indian Railways very inefficient, and because of this, because freight railways are very expensive for transporters use road transport for transporting for transporting goods over long distances as well, right? And that is not efficient for India. Make sense? So this is the problem. Then there are many more issues you'll find in your model answer. There are these issues that plague the Indian Railways is not efficient, Indian Railways is not adopting new technology, Indian Railways is not making better investments, they are not making new investments on new coaches, new wagons, new technology, right? All these things. Then how will private sector participation solve this problem? First of all, if private trains are operating, they would want to operate on profit, right? So they won't follow this policy of cross subsidization. So they'll be more financially viable, right? So first of all, private sector would solve the problem of loss making. Then they would operate the trains better. Then they would enhance efficiency of management of Indian Railways. Then they would invest more. Then they would provide better services to the consumers. They might keep the prices high, but they will provide better services because after all, they want to attract consumers towards their trains. Private players would want that consumers are attracted towards their trains and they prefer private trains over government trains, right? So in a sense, to do all of that, they would provide better services, they would adopt new technology, they would make further investments, and all these things would make railways in India more efficient, right? So you'll write about these things. Then, what sort of challenges privatization, or what are the cons of privatizing railways? First of all, as private players operate for profit, ticket price would increase. That would be detrimental to inclusive growth. It would impact poor people more who are dependent on Indian Railways. So poor people stand out to lose. Okay, poor people stand to lose. Then private players are also prone to corruption and all that stuff. So you need better regulation of private players operating in railways, right? So regulatory issues. Then tariff prices can be too high. And all the other things. These are the challenges. And in the end, you'll mention some of the steps taken by the government to enhance private sector participation. All right. So my main aim of discussing this particular question, because I already know that you know all the important points with all the important content with respect to this question. The challenging part is how to structure your answer. Well, you'll follow this particular flow chart to structure your answer. All right. Make sense? All right then. Let's move on to next question. Question 4. This is also pretty easy. If you have attended our economics lectures, well, this question is it's a cakewalk for you because we discuss logistics sector in great detail in our lectures. All right. Nonetheless, let's talk about this. Investment in logistics sector has the potential to not only enhance efficiency of the domestic economy, but also India's exports. Discuss in the light of some of the initiatives taken by the government in that regard. Well, you know what logistics sector is? Well, all the goods that are produced in a factory reach the final consumers. All the processes that a product goes through from factory gate to the gates of the consumer, all these processes are known as logistics. It involves transportation, it involves material handling, it involves storage. All these things become a part of logistics sector. All right. Now, why is logistics sector important? I'll tell you why. If your logistics sector is not efficient, and by efficient, I mean that if your logistics sector is not efficient, the cost of providing logistics services would rise. So in India, logistics sector is not working well, it's not efficient, and hence logistics cost is very high. Now what is happening? The factory owner produces a particular good, let's suppose it produces this pen and keeps the price of this pen at 100 rupees. Now this pen has to be transported to the consumer, right? So transportation charges would be added to the price of this product, then storage charges would be added to the price of this product. Let's suppose all the logistics services that this product uses cost around 50 rupees. And the final consumer would buy this product at 150 rupees. What's the problem? If your logistics sector becomes efficient, this cost would come down. When this cost would come down, the final price of the product would come down. And as you know, if you have basic knowledge of economics, well, when the price declines, demand increases, right? If this product becomes cheaper, demand for this product would increase. Demand for this product would increase, then this would encourage this factory owner to produce more of those goods. And if this factory owner increases its volume of production, if this factory increases its volume of production, then what will happen? Of course, output will increase. And when output increases, what we say is GDP increases, right? So to enhance the GDP, to enhance your country's GDP, well, you need to make your logistics sector more efficient, because if logistics sector becomes more efficient, costs come down. Costs come down, demand increases, then, well, the entire economy stands to benefit. Make sense? So this is the basic idea that you need to be familiar with before even answering this question. Now, this question is actually telling you that investment in logistics sector has the potential to not only enhance efficiency of the domestic economy, but also India's exports. Now, this logic is valid for India's exports as well. If the price of Indian products becomes cheaper, if price of Indian products declines, then demand for Indian products worldwide would also increase. So demand this efficiency in logistics sector won't enhance domestic demand. Will not only have an impact on domestic demand, it will also enhance export demand. So in a sense, India's GDP would rise, India's exports would rise, because our exports would now become price competitive, right? Because logistics services, or the cost of logistics services, is coming down, right? Now, this question is also asking you to tell what challenges this logistics sector is facing. What are the challenges that plague the logistics sector, right? So after you will mention those challenges, then only you will say that India needs to invest more in the logistics sector so as to enhance this entire cycle. All right. So first you will mention the challenges being faced by Indian logistics sector. Well, number one is Indian logistics sector is pretty fragmented. There are too many small players instead of few large players. So fragmented sector breeds inefficiency. And we know now that inefficiency would hamper the entire economy. Clear? So fragmented, then lack of capital, then lack of skilled manpower, poor quality of infra like roads, storage houses and all that stuff. So there are various other problems. Then regulatory problems, policy problems, government policy flip-flops. Government changes its policy very frequently, quite frequently, right? So these are the problems these are the challenges that the government, that the logistics sector in India faces. Now, India needs to invest more in the logistics sector so that India solves these problems. And if India solves these problems, then cost of logistics services would come down. This would not only benefit the domestic economy, it would also benefit India's exports. And when India's exports increase, consumption demand increases. well, then India's GDP would rise. Maybe investing way more in logistics sector, on logistics, would actually facilitate India's aim of becoming a $5 trillion economy. Because after all, what is GDP? We have discussed this. GDP is driven by 4 factors: consumption demand, investment demand, government expenditure, and net exports. If you invest heavily in the logistics sector, well, you are increasing investment expenditure. When logistics sector becomes efficient, well, consumer demand would also increase, this would also increase, and export demand would also increase. So in a way, 3 major drivers of GDP would be triggered if you invest heavily in the logistics sector. So your GDP would rise as a result of that. All right, makes sense? So yeah, now discuss this in the light of some of the initiatives taken by the government in that regard. Well, government has taken a lot of initiatives. Well, one of the major initiatives is that government is investing heavily on transportation infrastructure, government is investing heavily on storage infrastructure, plus government has put logistics sector in this list, harmonized master list. Now that the government has kept logistics sector in this particular harmonized master list, now logistics sector can get cheap loans from banks. So this problem of lack of access to capital would get solved because government has kept logistics sector in this particular list. All the sectors that are mentioned in this list get cheap finance from banks. Now that the government has introduced logistics sector also in this list, now logistics sector would also get cheap finance from the banks. All right. So this is one of the initiatives, and there are various other initiatives that you find in your model answer. So don't worry about that. My point again is to give some structure to your answer and to provide certain points, to provide you with some content that you might not have read elsewhere. All right. So I've given you certain points to write in your answer, and I've also told you how you can structure this answer. Make sense? All right. Okay, then let's move on to the last question. Critically analyze the issues plaguing the aviation sector in India. What needs to be done to overcome these issues and concerns? Discuss. Well, I think it's a pretty simple question because we have read about aviation sector a lot. What are the issues plaguing the aviation sector? Well, high cost of aviation turbine fuel, high operating cost, too much, huge tax burden, then efficiency in the airline operation, right? There are various issues that are plaguing the aviation sector. And what has been done by the government? Well, you know about this also. If you have read your current affairs properly, government has taken a lot of steps. The most recent one is privatizing Air India, right? So government has taken a lot of steps to reform aviation sector because aviation sector can also be a driver of economic growth. All right. So aviation sector is also an important one. Now, if you know all of this, and I know that you know all of this, then I would want you guys to attempt this question yourself. You might have noticed that I give some questions to you as homework, right? So this is one of those questions. Please write this question yourself. First, write this question yourself. First, structure this question. Write whatever content is in your mind in that structure. First, write this question and then refer to the model answer given to you. All right? Don't see the model answer beforehand. First, write this question and then refer to the model answers. Clear? That's my advice for all the questions that we have discussed so far. Clear? Make sense? All right then. So this question shall be attempted by you guys yourself. And if you have any doubts, well, you can ask me those doubts. But I think your doubts would be cleared if you read the model answers that are given to you along with this lecture. All right, makes sense? So yeah, with this, we are done with today's lecture. And not only today's lecture, we are done with this series of economics for UPSC Mains 2021. I hope you enjoyed this entire series. Now, and I also hope that it added some value to your preparation. I'm sincerely hoping that because we have put in a lot of hard work to provide you with these issues. All right. Now, what I want you guys to do is that you should focus now that you have covered the economics portion. Now you should focus on other aspects or other parts of your syllabus. Also, all right, so focus on the other parts of your syllabus. Please do that, because each and every part of your syllabus is important. Clear? Economics portion is done. Revise this portion. You might practice some of these questions that we have discussed so far. All right, and if you encounter any doubts, if you have any doubts, then you are free to ask us those doubts. This comment section below is open for your doubts only. Then we have you are enrolled in WhatsApp groups where you can email us, you can contact us, call us, message us. All sorts of avenues for communication, all sorts of communication channels are open for you guys only, so that you can ask your doubts. All right, so I hope you have enjoyed this lecture series for economics. If you have any doubts, please ask us those doubts. We are eagerly waiting for them all. All right, so yeah, that's it from my side, guys. I'll see you next time with more stuff. Thank you.